Hello and welcome. In this video I will take you through the process of making a design choice in the Balance Worksheet. This is not so much a tutorial because there is no one-size-fits-all answer when designing an action. The choices you make depend on various factors, such as the client's wishes and taste, the possibilities the piano offers, your own experience, and sometimes the available budget. What I can do is take you through a number of practical examples and explain which choices I make in those situations and why. Hopefully, this will provide some guidance for colleagues who have not yet created their own design very often. It is not intended as a fixed guideline, but rather as an insight into my considerations and working method. For this example, I am using a Bosendorfer action from the 1980s, whose hammers and shanks needed to be replaced. Whenever you replace parts of an action, it is always necessary to rebalance. That is why I first made an analysis using the newly glued hammers. We begin on the Overview tab. The first thing I look at is the strike weight. I use the Bosendorfer hammers that, according to Renner, belong with this model. Based on the measurements, this turns out to be quite a heavy hammerhead. Fortunately, this grand piano is placed in a room where the sound can develop well, and a modern grand with a modern soundboard should not have any problems with this strike weight. Next, I look at the measured ratio. I see a ratio of about 6.0. I also see a green area that lies clearly below my measured ratio. This green area indicates which ratio is safe for the measured strike weight. That recommended ratio is considerably lower, which means that this leverage was actually intended for a much lighter hammerhead. At that point, I already know that some work needs to be done. Then I look at the front weight. The front weight is pretty low on average. This means that originally the strike weight could have been much lower, maybe also in combination with a high balance weight. At the bottom, we also see 3 more graphs. The 2 graphs on the left show the up weight, down weight and balance weight respectively. At this stage, these are less relevant, because we have already established that the ratio is not optimal. The graph on the right shows the friction. It still looks a little irregular. I will take care of those irregularities before my next analysis. Now let us go to the next step to create a design. Here, several green lines appear that we can use for designing. What I always find interesting is to first see what would happen if I balance the action in the traditional way, solely by adding lead to the keys to achieve the desired down weight. I place the design line for the strike weight over the measured values, activate the option that makes the program calculate using my measured ratio, and set the balance weight to 38 grams. That is a common value for a modern grand piano and roughly corresponds to a down weight of 50 grams. Now look at the result for the front weight. The picture looks extreme, and it is. Yet I come across these kinds of situations regularly in practice. With a traditional approach, there would ultimately be more lead than wood in the keys, especially in the bass. Although the action would then formally come out at about 50 grams of down weight, in practice it would play very heavily and unpleasantly. To solve this, we have 2 options. 1. We bring the hammers back to a weight that matches the existing ratio. 2. We adjust the ratio so that it better matches the new strike weight. In this case, I choose to adjust the ratio. Based on my experience, I expect that both the grand piano and the room can handle this strike weight well. In addition, it is very difficult to remove that much weight neatly from Renner hammers. Let us first look at roughly which ratio is needed. At the top, the program gives advice for the ratio that matches the average measured strike weight. In this case, that comes out at about 5.25. So that becomes my target value. I decide to move the capstan a few millimeters forward, and then make a new analysis. After entering the new measurement data, I select my second analysis. As you can see, the measured ratio immediately drops downward. On average, I now come out at a ratio of about 5.0. You can also see that the front weight now lies in a much more favorable area. As far as the ratio is concerned, I am satisfied here. A slightly lower value is not a problem in this case. With a somewhat higher strike weight, you are generally safe when you end up at or just below the advised ratio and, with a balance weight of 38 grams, stay below the curve 9 line for the front weight. I do still see a slight rise in the base area that I would like to make a little more even, so I want to take some weight off the hammers in this area. This already looks much more balanced as a whole. Now I can go to the print page and calibrate all the hammers and keys individually on the scale. This was an example of a fairly common situation that you may encounter in practice. Now let us look at an action from a Bechstein from around 1900. Because this is an old Bechstein, I ordered extra light hammerheads in advance. In addition, I tapered the hammers before gluing them in order to achieve as even a strike weight as possible. My goal with this instrument is a light touch that matches the character of the piano. After the first analysis, I once again look at the Overview tab. As you can see, the tapering worked well. The strike weight line runs nicely and evenly across the entire keyboard. The measured ratio is similar to that of the Bosendorfer action. In this case, the keys give a somewhat distorted picture because I have already removed all the original lead. Let's go to the Design tab. By now, the hammers are as light as I can reasonably make them, so I do not expect to gain much more there. For the balance weight, I deliberately choose a slightly lower value than for a modern action. I set it at 36 grams. Then I look at the design and try to weigh all the advantages and disadvantages against each other. The first thing that stands out is that the touch becomes extremely light. That certainly has its charm and fits well with the character of this instrument, but it may be a bit too much here. In addition, I have to take a practical reality into account. This grand piano ultimately has to be sold. If a pianist gets the feeling that the keys shoot away under the fingers, that may be experienced as unpleasant. The combination of light hammerheads and a low ratio also requires attention. A lower ratio generally means less blow distance. Of course, I could partly compensate for that by applying more key dip, but that does not feel right to me for an instrument from this period. Personally, in this case, I prefer a little more blow distance. That way the pianist can still give the light hammer enough speed during the keystroke. These are typical moments when I often sit behind my screen for another 10 minutes just reflecting. What exactly do I want to achieve? Which characteristics suit this instrument? Which advantages outweigh which disadvantages? There is no formula that always gives the right answer. In the end, I decide to move the capstan a little after all, so that the ratio becomes somewhat higher. Then I make a new analysis and review the design again. The ratio now comes out at about 5.6. That is still lower than the advised value of 6.07, but the whole picture feels better balanced, and the front weight takes on a somewhat more modern character. That gives me more confidence. It preserves the light and responsive touch I had in mind, while at the same time making it more accessible to a broader group of pianists. Now I proceed to calibrate the hammerheads and keys on my scale. Finally, I would like to share a special design example with you from a German high-quality piano from the late 1980s. An instrument that was in exceptionally good condition and had hardly been played. This action, therefore, did not end up on my workbench for restoration or major maintenance. The reason was much simpler. The piano did not play pleasantly. Upon inspection, it turned out that the action was equipped with whippen support springs. These are springs mounted on the whippen, and manufacturers use them to make an action feel lighter. To first get a good picture of the basic balance, I detached these springs and then carried out an initial analysis. In the overview screen, we immediately see a number of interesting things. The strike weight is average to somewhat heavy, while the leverage ratio does not really match it well. As you can see, the green safe area lies considerably lower. That immediately shows that the current ratio does not match the measured strike weight. Something else also stands out in the front weight. The first test keys are strikingly light, after which the front weight suddenly increases sharply. From this graph alone, you can roughly tell up to which point the whippen support springs were originally present. We move on to the Design tab. I set the strike weight to the measured values and let the program calculate based on the existing situation. You immediately see what happens to the front weight. At the same time, it becomes clear that the original front weight of the keys, without support from the whippen support springs, comes quite close to this design. This quickly reveals the problem. The ratio simply does not match the strike weight very well, and the whippen support springs are set to full battle mode. My first step is simple: that ratio needs to go down. I move the capstan a considerable distance and then make a new analysis. The ratio is clearly improved and moves much closer to the desired area. Still, the ratio is not yet quite at the point where I would call it safe. At that point, I have two options. The first option is to lower the ratio even further by moving the key balance point. The second option is to make use of the whippen support springs for which this action was originally designed. Because the capstan and key balance point is already at its extreme setting, I cannot easily change the ratio more, so I will have to work with the whippen support springs. I activate the whippen support springs function. In this action, the springs were originally present up to about key 50. Therefore, I let the support gradually come in from key 40 onward and give the springs a modest preload of a few grams. You immediately see the effect. The front weight in the base and middle section decreases noticeably. Still, I find the keys, especially in the middle and treble, a little on the heavy side. I choose to apply the whippen support springs across the entire action. To do this, I set the range to all 88 keys and adjust the progression in such a way that each spring provides the same support. Now you can see that the front weight across almost the entire keyboard ends up in a safe and pleasantly playable range. Moreover, this solution offers additional possibilities during regulation. By giving the springs a little more tension, you can further lower the balance weight without making major changes to the other parts of the action. This example nicely shows that whippen support springs can sometimes be a valuable aid. When I choose this design, the next step consists of accurately calibrating the hammerheads and the keys, followed by installing the remaining whippen support springs. After regulating the action, I can then use this tab to adjust the springs precisely. I select the desired balance weight from my design and then measure the up weight and down weight of each key. Based on that, the program calculates the up and down weight needed for the right spring tension. It is a labor-intensive process, but the result is worth it. With properly regulated whippen support springs, you can achieve an exceptionally even balance weight across the entire keyboard, something that is almost impossible to accomplish with traditional methods. I hope this video helps you making choices in the Balance Worksheet. If you haven't got the worksheet yet, you can find the link in the description. If you are having trouble making a design, share your design with the community and let's design together. For that, I also put a link in the description. Thank you and happy balancing!